Olá, tudo bem? I'm Emma from Portuguese Language Lessons. In this short video, I'm going to talk you through how reflexive verbs work in European Portuguese. Okay, now I'm going to go through this worksheet to help explain it. Reflexive verbs cause a lot of difficulty for learners of European Portuguese. One, they're very different to English. If you're a native English speaker, you don't see these reflexive verbs so much. They've got their own special grammar. And two, if you're used to translating things on the internet and looking at various things on the internet, you'll come across a lot of how Brazilian Portuguese works with these, which is completely different. Okay, so here I'm talking 100% about how these work in European Portuguese. First of all, what are they? In English, I'd say I wash myself, he cut himself, etc., where the recipient of the action is the same as the person who performs the action. Okay. In English, we don't use them so much, more for emphasis. They're much more common in Portuguese than English. And in fact, there's a lot of them that do not have really any translation or reason for being reflexive in English. We just have to get used to the fact that they are reflexive. They need to have this little tag bit that goes along with them. Okay, so here I've written you some examples. Atrasar-se, banhar-se, barbear-se. So you can see some of these, we can logically see how they can be reflexive. To bathe, to go to bed, to undress. But some of them we really could have difficulty in understanding how they're reflexive, to be mistaken, to remember, to feel, etc. Some of them, remember, are not just about to yourself, they could be reciprocal to another person. So encontrarse, to meet, we meet each other, etc. Okay, the more you read, the more you get used to these, the more you'll see this reflexive bit in the text. So what is it all about? I'm going to talk here about the present tense, and I'm giving the example of sentar-se, to sit yourself down. So if we're just going to conjugate it normally for the 5 different forms, sento, sentas, senta, sentamos, sentam, we need to do that. And then in addition, we're adding on a little ending. Me, te, se, nos, se. Okay, so sento-me, sentas-te, senta-se. Now, with the naj, this becomes a bit too much to say with that S on the end. Drop the S. Sentamo-nos. Okay. Sentam-se for the last one. Okay, you have to drop that S there. Okay. So, as well as changing the verb, we tag on the me, te, se, nos, se, etc. Okay. This could be in any tense, but here I'm just talking about the present tense. Now, a very important note is pronunciation. People overpronounce these words, and it ends up sounding quite alien and not Portuguese. You need to pronounce them very softly, very quickly. Me, te, se, nos. Do not overemphasize them. They're small grammatical words, and they're not very important. They're not carrying a lot of meaning, so we do not emphasize them. Okay. So, a couple of examples here. In English, I cut myself. Cut, you hear clearly. Myself, we don't need to hear that word so clearly. It's not a very strong word in the sentence. A cup of tea. I hear cup and tea. The other words are not so strongly emphasized. That is how we speak correctly, rather than a cup of tea. I cut myself. It sounds very odd. Okay, so sento-me, sentas-te, not sento-me, sentas-te, becomes sounding very odd. Okay. Right. So where does this little reflexive part go? It's normally at the end, joined by a little hyphen. Eu lavo-me todos os dias, tu levantas-te cedo, você deita-se tarde, ele veste-se no quarto, nós encontramos-nos no café, vocês sentam-se à mesa, eles sentam-se bem. Okay? So here we put the little reflexive bit in. I can always miss the subject pronouns out. Eu, tu, você, ele. That would be fine. But I cannot ever miss out this reflexive pronoun. Okay. So some practice here. Eu Joanna, I'm called, I call myself Joanna. So this is chamo-me Joanna. Okay. And ela sentir-se bem, she feels good, ela sente-se bem. Você levanta-se, do you get up early? Você levanta-se cedo. Nós, we go to bed late. Nós deitamo-nos muito tarde. So dropping the S. And eles, they are late every day. Eles atrasam-se todos os dias. Okay, I think I put the answers here. Okay. However, we see this reflexive pronoun, that m, t, etc., before the verb in certain sentences with certain types of word, just before the verb. And I like to call these words trigger words. And for now, we could say they come in 3 groups. Negative words, não, nunca, nada, ninguém, nem, anything with a negative meaning. A question word, quando, que, onde, qual, quem, even when it's not a question, just the fact of one of these words being there. Or adverbials, a loose group here, também, só, já, ainda, talvez, sempre, todo, tudo, muito, pouco, alguém. You'll get used to these words as you learn Portuguese. Here's a few examples here. We've got some questions with question words, and we've got some negative words. So you see here the pronoun bit now is right before the verb, and now we do not need a hyphen. Okay. So onde é que eu me sento? A que horas tu te levantas? Como se chama? A que horas é que ele se deita? Quando é que nós nos encontramos? Como é que vocês se sentem? Onde é que elas se sentam? Eu não me levanto cedo, tu não te deitas tarde, você não se lava, ela não se veste no quarto, nós não nos coçamos, elas não se sentam à mesa, eles não se sentem bem. Okay, so you can see here that the pronoun has come before. We can put in the subject pronoun. We can always miss this out, okay, that would be fine, but we cannot miss out our reflexive pronoun. Okay, and the reflexive pronoun must be right next to the verb, okay? I cannot put anything between the reflexive pronoun and the verb, whether it's before or after, okay? Let's just go through what these mean in case you're wondering. Where do I sit? What time do you get up? What do you called, or what is he called? What time does he go to bed? When is it that we're meeting? How do you guys feel? Where do they sit? I don't get up early. You don't go to bed late. You don't wash yourself. She doesn't get dressed in the bedroom. We don't put shoes on. They don't sit at the table. They don't feel well. Okay. Now, questions often cause confusion for students. Look at these examples. These are all correct. So, ela levanta-se cedo. Quando é que ela se levanta? Não sei quando ela se levanta. Now, examples 1 and 2, these are both questions. But I move it in number 2 to here, but I do not move it in number 1. Why? Because in number 1, I do not have a trigger word. It might be a question, but it has no trigger word. Therefore, I do not move the reflexive pronoun. In Deutsch, I do have a trigger word. Therefore, I move it. Number 3, this isn't a question, but I've moved it. Why? Because I have a trigger word. Okay, and that is what makes it move. I actually need one of these specific words right before the verb to move it. Okay, another good point to say is if if the sentence carried on further and I had the word quando in it later on in the sentence, that wouldn't make a word earlier on in the sentence move. It has to be exactly in that little bit right by the word. Okay, so a few more examples. Sento-me nesta cadeira. I sit myself in this chair. Lembras-te do Steve? Do you remember Steve? Now or nunca nos deitamos tarde. We don't or never go to bed late. Here it's moved. Como é que te chamas? What are you called? We move it because of that there. Okay, so I hope that's helped you to demystify how the reflexive verbs work. Okay, ciao ciao!